Welcome to part two of a very special series honoring National Cancer Survivor Month on Navigating Cancer Together. This week, I am talking with Scott Mikesh. Scott is joining us to talk all about mental fitness and the mental fitness movement. Hello, everyone. This is Talaya Dendy from On the Other Side Life, and you are listening to Navigating Cancer Together, the show that has something for everyone facing cancer. Why? Because everyone is different with different needs, beliefs, and perspectives. Thank you for joining us for this episode. I encourage you to open your minds and your hearts. Today, we have a very special guest. Scott Mikesh is here to talk all about mental health and mental fitness. Scott is an award winning LGBTBE business leader, communicator, neurodiversity specialist, and one of the notable pioneers of the mental fitness movement. After 20 years of applying psychological theories to influence attitudes and behaviors, Scott founded 4D Fit Mental Fitness to proactively promote mental health, motivation, and achievement from inside out. Scott's book is titled My Brain Can't Poop. That is very interesting. It is a mental fitness guide for humans. It raises awareness about the critical factors of brain health, mental function, and neurodiversity in maintaining mental health and well being. Scott is a busy man because he has also launched Mental Fitness for All, which is a 501c3 partner program to provide reduced cost training for income eligible organizations. Scott joins me today to talk all about mental fitness and practices to apply to cancer care and support. Scott, you are an amazing man. You're doing a lot of great work. Thank you so much for taking time to join me today.
Thank you, Talaya. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm just so excited, and it warms my heart to be able to connect and share in this way too. So thank you for that.
My pleasure, Scott. Before we really get into the conversation about mental health and cancer, please share with the audience, more about who you are, your background, and what led you to do the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. My challenge has been to try to abbreviate it as much as possible because it is a big part of my own mental health and fitness journey. And to be able to articulate it in a way that really resonates with people and doesn't consume hours of time has always been a challenge of mine. So my kind of brief take on it really is just going back to my childhood is really where it started for all of us, really. If we kind of dig deep, that's where a lot of our purpose and passion starts and starts to kind of form its roots in our nervous system too. But really, kind of my journey with self-exploration, self-acceptance, as a gay man, I'm really struggling with my own identity, my own thoughts and feelings that, I wasn't necessarily taught that was okay. And so I really thought there was something wrong with me for a very long time and really went through a lot of denial, repression. And I like to say too that there are many different aspects of life that people can struggle with in that way. It doesn't necessarily just have to be sexual orientation. So there are a lot of parts about just trying to fit into society of the expectations that we see that are placed upon us that we can really struggle with. And whatever that might be for you and your journey, it can create a lot of stress. And there are ways that we might navigate that and adapt or maladapt in some cases too. But for me, it was really, I look back now and I really leaned into my creativity, my imagination. I spent a lot of time alone. Again, I just didn't quite feel safe and connected with people the way that I really wanted to. Just again, feeling like I was hiding a part of myself that I didn't feel I could fully disclose or share or even think about at the time. And that really, I think, allowed me, or I shouldn't say allow, but it basically like forced me into finding other avenues of finding safety and finding purpose and contentment and joy in life. And that really, I believe, led me to lean on my creativity. So art and creativity was a very strong factor in my upbringing. My dad's a professional musician. My mom's very musical and artistic, in her own right too. And so it was a very supportive family in terms of fostering creativity. And that was really my outlet. And as I, moved into high school and into college, I really gravitated towards social psychology and exploring, I wanted to use my creativity in some professional way. I believe that was a strength of mine, but I wanted to use it in a way that was very healthful and motivating. And, as I started to venture into psychology, at the time, there just wasn't a lot of focus on the brain or nervous system. So that came much later in my journey and my career, but a lot on influencing attitudes and behaviors and a lot of research and why do people behave the way they do? What are those driving factors? And a lot of times in psychology, it's just a matter of observation. So we're just seeing behaviors, we're hearing people share their feelings, and we're making our best guess, right? So that's the psychology field. It's been very theoretical and a lot of kind of best guesses based on research or statistics. And that led me into marketing and communication. So again, using those skills of influence and communication to influence attitudes and behaviors in healthful ways. I ended up thankfully in the healthcare industry for many years. So doing employee communications, leading diversity, equity, inclusion programs, employee wellness, volunteer and community outreach programs, and very much focused on how do you communicate with people and influence them to take action, to do the healthful thing. That's a whole art form in itself. And so, in my career, that moved forward. I was in corporate for a while in kind of the healthcare sector, and then left to pursue my own business and just focused on kind of consulting and freelance communications and design work for a couple years. I ended up volunteering with a program called Art Buddies. And so they are a youth art mentor program that uses creativity to foster self-confidence, to really foster the belief in their creative abilities as a skill set, and the outcomes really became very therapeutic in many ways, even though it wasn't an art therapy program. But the kids would develop better relationships with other kids because it was a one-on-one mentor program, so they didn't have to compete for attention. And, they got the reinforcement and encouragement to explore their creativity. There were no wrong answers, there was no punishment involved. So it was very much a celebratory sort of program where every idea was one to be considered and, explored and tried, and trial and error was just part of the program. And that really led me into the path of mental fitness. So without even kind of realizing it, my curiosity led me further into, you know, why creativity was such an important factor for me, why creativity is such an important part for developing brains and aging brains as well, and also why we tend to remove those programs as soon as we don't have a budget for them, right? So arts programs are oftentimes one of the first to get stripped from educational programming, which was partly why Art Buddies existed, was to replace arts programs that had been removed in schools. And so it was offered as an after-school program. But really wanted to get down to, why these from a human development perspective and not just kind of that mystical thinking that, just make them nice and pretty, and art is a nice thing to do, but really, from a human development perspective, why is creativity and art so important? And that led me into studying the brain and nervous system more. And as I did that, just even approaching motivation, like what really fuels motivation neurologically. And then that being connected to mental health and well-being, and me struggling again with generalized anxiety disorder that I was diagnosed with late in life, and ADHD, and just a lot of different manifestations of our mental health that we may not even be aware of. May not even have the education information to know what's going on inside of us and why that is. So my curiosity just kept me digging deeper and deeper into the brain and nervous system. And eventually, that's what led to 40 Fit Mental Fitness. And part of the fitness aspect is really not so much that it's promoting physical fitness, because a lot of people think that automatically, that when I say fitness, I mean physical fitness, but really talking about fitness as proactive preventive care and preparation, right? Like fitness really is about preparing yourself for whatever sort of goals or obstacles you might be facing. And that's before crisis happens, right? So outside of the clinical setting, before you get into a health crisis or an emergency situation? What are those practices you can do to optimize yourself, your abilities within your abilities to thrive in your environment? And so that's really what I focus on now in mental fitness is, we know a lot of shoulds. We should eat better, we should do physical exercise, we should get more sleep. But really, why is it important and why is it so hard? We'll dive into it a little bit deeper too, but that connection of our nervous system to our overall health and well-being is a significant factor, even when it comes to cancer. And so it's just been kind of a total, 360 in my own learning, just how everything is connected.
Thank you so much, Scott, for sharing that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
just for sharing more about your background, because I think it's very important. A lot of people out there will be able to relate. There are some key themes that I heard that I think are very important to shine the light on. One of them was and is how you use creativity to really explore who you are, find your tribe, and just feel like, hey, I'm okay. I'm fine just the way I am. I think that's very important to note because creativity in some spaces is shunned. So, thank you for sharing that. The other thing that you mentioned that I think is very important is the true definition of fitness, which is being prepared, prevention also. And I think that another thing that's very important is getting that education. Those are some key things that I really heard you say that I think are very important. Scott, let's transition over to talking more about cancer. Thankfully, you have not been diagnosed with cancer, but unfortunately, many of your family members have. Scott, please, if you're comfortable, share how that has personally impacted you in different ways.
Yeah. So cancer, runs in my family as it does many families, but for many different reasons. So I don't know, necessarily the genetic predisposition. I don't know of anybody that's, been genetically tested, but of course, family history is a big factor a lot of times when trying to either identify cancer or do some sort of cancer prevention. So for me personally, I think, in my immediate family, my extended family, cancer has hit people for different reasons too. Typically after the age of 50 or 60 for most of my extended family. But my immediate family, the first cancer diagnosis, it was treated early, was really my mom. I know she had melanoma probably in her 30s, you know, identified early, was removed, didn't really have to go through much more treatment other than that. So in my memory, in my recollection of immediate family, that was kind of my first notion of, oh, there's cancer. Somebody, has cancer, but that it's not just a death sentence, right? Like it is something that pops up. You need to be able to identify it, the earlier treatment, the better. And so it really was just kind of my first exposure to a family member having cancer cells detected as a health factor. Then my brother was diagnosed with testicular cancer, and I know he would be comfortable sharing. He's very much an advocate as well, and just education and awareness. He was in his early 20s. He didn't necessarily have the support systems or really know what was going on. So he pretty much went through it himself without disclosing his symptoms or sharing anything until he had to have surgery. And then it was basically you couldn't hide it then. Why are you in the hospital? So then he disclosed, and he was at the stage 4 level of testicular cancer by the time that he was treated. So he had some pretty intense treatments, went through chemo, went through, I think it's called the lympectomy. I forget now, like all the terms. That's one thing with cancer is you start to
Yes.
learn all these
Right.
$10 words that everyone else
Right.
says. What the heck is that?
$10 words.
Yeah, that you probably never hear otherwise.
Mhm.
But he had several surgeries and went through several years of treatment and had a few complications with that too. Thankfully, he's in remission now. It's been, gosh, 20 plus years that he's been in remission. And even learning through that, that was kind of the ripe age and the ripe circumstances for testicular cancer was, his age, different life circumstances. One of our uncles had had it as well. So oftentimes we'll start diving into family history once it hits you. And it's really easy to kind of not pay attention, or, it's kind of a scary topic to even talk about. So, it oftentimes you may not even really know how different health conditions have affected different family because there's a lot of privacy and maybe stigma around it, or just that fear factor, right? And but knowledge is power, and really being aware and not being afraid to take care of your health, and to seek treatment when you need it before it is too late, or further down the path that makes it that much harder. With my sister, she was a different story. So I'm right in the middle. My sister is 3 years older than me. My brother's a year younger than me. So now that we're older, it's hard to keep track of who's older, but
Exactly.
we're all basically the same age. So we're all within 4 years of each other. So my brother's a year younger than me, and my sister is about 3 years older than me. So she was diagnosed with, now I'm trying to, ALL. So it was the lymphoblastic leukemia, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Again, a word I never knew the different types of leukemia even until she had it. She was diagnosed pretty late as well. Whereas with her, she was very much an advocate for her own health and started having back pain, and was going in and trying to figure out what's causing this back pain. And she was referred to chiropractors. And obviously that wasn't what the problem was, but she really had a hard time trying to articulate, what the pain felt like. She knew it was back pain, but she knew it didn't feel like a joint sort of pain. And
Mhm.
she really had a hard time explaining that. And I don't remember what her final symptoms were. I think within 6 months, she went to the doctor maybe every few weeks or every month just to try to figure out what the heck is going on. And they finally took a blood test, and I believe it was her T cell count was like through the roof. And
Mm.
they admitted her that afternoon and started
Wow.
treatment like right away. And they basically said, I mean, you were on the verge of it, maybe I don't know if it would have been a blood clot or a type of stroke, but it
Yeah.
was basically her blood was just so overloaded with T cells that she was just on the verge of having a health crisis,
Mhm.
and having something that could have killed her. And so she was admitted right away. Again, very different treatment, trying to do bone marrow samples and all of that. Still went through chemotherapy and radiation and a bunch of different treatments. So that went on for a few years. And again, thankfully, after all of her treatment, a lot of fear factors involved. The data, looking up the data
Mhm.
was not encouraging,
Exactly.
was not helpful whatsoever, other than just inducing fear and panic. But
Mhm.
she, again, thankfully, just whatever the compounding factors were, she is in remission now, again, for about 20 years. So she was diagnosed only a couple years after my brother
Wow.
was in remission. So my brother had gone through his cancer, he was just in the clear, and then she got diagnosed.
Mm.
So me being kind of right in the middle, all in our 20s, I basically thought, okay, when is the shoe gonna drop?
Yes.
When am I next? And approaching 30, I just had this goal. If I can live until I'm 30, I'm gonna, buy a house, and I had a decent job and just do all the things, like, kind of have my bucket list of
Yes.
what do I want? What do I want to feel like I've accomplished in life? And who needs that extra pressure, right?
Exactly. In their
So
30s.
yeah, yeah. So it was just this real challenging time, and to talk with both of them too. At the time, there was no certainty in their survival. Like, there was no certainty in their recovery. There was no certainty in achieving full remission and how long that would even last.
Mm.
And having conversations with your siblings and your loved ones in that situation is incredibly hard. It's hard when they're older adults and you're dealing with parents, but it's even harder when, the person is young and they're
Yeah.
just starting their life. And what sort of encouragement and reassuring words can you possibly come up with? And so it really kind of comes to this realization that you just need to take every day as it comes, and to just live in the moment and do the best you can in the moment, and to just really not bank on that 5-year plan, that our culture
Mhm.
kind of is
Yeah.
fixated with, right? It's like set
That's
life
right.
goals and what's going to happen 5 years from now. And then life happens and you realize, you want something to work toward. You want something that gives you hope, but sometimes that hope is just getting through the day.
That's right.
It's just getting to tomorrow and giving yourself that grace to not put all these societal pressures on you and expectations. That again, that 360 going back to my
Hmm.
childhood and
That's
just
right.
the self-acceptance and everything else and all these societal pressures that add to the stress. And even as we understand cancer more and all of the carcinogens and toxicity and inflammation that's going on, how much stress really compounds and contributes to
Yes.
that part of our health and well-being. So in my journey and dealing with cancer in my family later in life, now my dad, in his later years, he's still alive. He's in his 80s now,
Hmm.
but he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma about 10 years ago, went through treatment, went through, chemo, and was in remission
Hmm.
for the last several years, and just recently was diagnosed with bladder cancer.
Oh, sorry to
That
hear
is,
that.
yeah, thank you. And it's not treatable at this point, but,
Yeah,
so it is kind of day to day, like how do you
that's
make the
right.
most of each day? And again, thankfully, my mom is still relatively healthy, has other health conditions, but, not necessarily dealing with cancer at this point. But it's definitely swirled around my life as it has for many other people. And, really, for me, it's been staying educated and really not seeing it as this evil enemy,
Yeah,
but just seeing it as part of nature where it's an unhealthful thing. It's like an earthquake, it's like a
that's
natural
right.
disaster. It's part of nature that we don't want to have happen, but sometimes it does happen. And it has no malintent. Like
Yeah.
it's not out to get you, and
Hmm.
I even think having that mindset can induce a lot of stress, kind
Right.
of like, why me? Like, why is it attacking me? What
Hmm.
did I do wrong? Like somehow it's a punishment.
Yes.
And to just realize like these are facts of health and nature that we really need to, you know, learn about and be educated about so we can know how do we live the healthiest way we can to avoid these occurrences, but that disasters still happen. These
Hmm.
things still pop up when they're least expected. And the
Right.
best we can do is move forward with knowledge and acceptance, not even acceptance of cancer, but acceptance of how the human condition works.
Yeah.
And as I shared with you before too, and we can maybe talk a little bit more about, is culturally as well, we tend to have this notion of mind over matter, that
Absolutely.
if
Yeah.
you're strong mentally, somehow that
Hmm.
means you can control everything, right?
That's right.
That
That's
your
right.
mind can control everything. And it can't. Like
That's
your
right.
mind is limited and it's part of your neurological, physiological being. And so what I like to say is to mind what matters.
Hmm.
And what matters is that you take care of yourself,
That's
you
right.
know?
That's right.
Yeah.
Again, you've covered so many different good points. And first of all, I'm really happy to hear that your brother, your sister, your mother are doing well into survivorship. And
Thank you.
I can only imagine, Scott, how tough that was for you, though, to just really see your family members one after the other going through this with
Mhm.
cancer. And I think that they're really blessed to have you, as a family member, as someone who they can talk to, and someone who can even advocate for them. So I really think it's important for people to really understand that family dynamic and how that can be a huge factor in one's cancer experience and also going through the different phases of cancer. Someone with your background in mental health, mental fitness, what were some things that you were able to, if you could just share one thing that
Mhm.
you were able to use or instill in your loved ones when they were facing cancer that was helpful?
Mhm. Yeah, so at the time, I knew less about how the brain and nervous system work, right? So at the time, as a lot of people are, you're kind of leaning into your intuition, into your own emotional sensitivities. Now, for me, I'm a highly sensitive person, and again, leaning on my creativity and that power of the prefrontal cortex, as I like to
Hmm.
say. And that's really what drives empathy.
Yes.
So it's really no surprise, again, as I study the brain and nervous system, why highly creative people, and I say creativity, also, I want to just define that creativity doesn't necessarily mean that you have a certain skill set of artistic abilities, but your ability to bring your ideas to life. So the fact that you have ideas and you find ways to bring them to life. That's really what I mean when I talk about creativity. And what that really requires is it really kind of requires you connecting your imagination with reality, right?
Mhm.
It's like connecting your internal world and your external world. And empathy is kind of a part of that part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, that's part of that. And empathy really, again, that ability to use your imagination to think, how would I feel in this person's situation? Like taking myself out of my own situation and really using your imagination to think with what this person has dealt with in their life, with what they are experiencing. How might that feel? And all we can really do is use our imagination. And that's really what I leaned on, especially with my siblings, because there just weren't words, it was just a feeling. It was just
Yes.
it was just like I could empathize with this immense sense of fear, but also this determination to want to survive and to want to, you know, as people a lot of times people say keep fighting,
Hmm.
right? I use that term very gently because the fight response is a stress induced response, and stress can
Yes.
exacerbate inflammation and all of those toxic sort of factors. So I use the term fight very loosely.
Hmm.
And as I've shared with you as well too, one of the pieces I lean on is how powerful peace can be.
Hmm.
And sometimes with my siblings, it was just a matter of being there with them.
Okay, let's pause right there because that
Yeah.
is so important for caregivers, friends, family to hear. I get that question so much from, caregivers and friends and family. What should I
Hmm.
be doing? Even
Hmm.
my mom, years later, I found out that when she was caring for me, she said she felt helpless.
Hmm.
And I said, well, mom, you know that you did everything you were supposed to do. You were there. You gave me
Hmm.
love. You took care of me. And you talked about the feeling, that's just it. You just show up. Your presence
Hmm.
is usually enough. So
Hmm.
sorry, Scott. I just wanted to shine more light on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And again, applying it to real life experience, right? That until we're in it, and I think that's why it can be really hard, is these aren't situations that we want, right? And so they are scary. And when we do end up in them, we're oftentimes we're learning as we go. It's kind of, baptism by fire. We're trying to
Right.
figure it out as we go. And it really is, again, now what I know with the brain and nervous system, it really makes sense. That healing part of your nervous system is optimized when you are at a state of low stress and safety and peace and contentment. And what is one of the most peaceful and safe feelings we can have is when a loved one is just near us.
Yeah.
When we feel protected just in our space,
Hmm.
just physically that person is with us. Maybe, I mean, in cases too, maybe it's a call or maybe it's reaching out with a letter. I mean, so those emotional sources of safety are very important too. But if you're going to be there physically with somebody, our stress response is we want to fix the solution. It's a
That's
problem and
right.
we want to fix it, right? So our brains kind of go to, what can I say? How can I solve this problem? I'm going to do all this research. I'm going to read all these articles, and then I'm going to overload this person who needs to be at peace with all of this information.
Hmm.
Could really stress them out. And I think as a care provider, kind of letting the person who's going through the healing process, really letting them kind of guide you, and knowing that that they'll either tell you what they need or the healthcare provider will tell you what they need. So if they are in a, a lucid state where they can share, here's what I need from you, or here's, can you get me this? Or if, what if their mobility is limited or if their energy is limited, just being there as a source of
Mhm.
support, that you don't have to be there to fix it and you don't have to be there to solve every problem. Just being there as a source of safety and support is incredibly healing in itself. And my heart goes out to people who don't have other people,
Yeah,
and
it's
how
tough.
hard that healing journey is when you're dealing with loneliness on top of it.
That's right. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
One thing I really want to talk about, we hear these words all the time, well-being, mental health. What are some things that people, and what you've seen, what you've experienced, and the people that you help and support, what are some things that they often misunderstand about maintaining health and well-being?
Honestly, I think the big missing link has been understanding not only how your brain functions, but how your nervous system functions and how that's directly connected to your immune system and your whole physiological system. I just don't think we get the proper education that connects those pieces for us. And even in our mental health field, I am continually surprised and amazed how very few mental health practitioners actually talk about the brain and nervous system. That there are still a lot of these old theories and ways of thinking about the mind as a construct of like the ego and the id and collective consciousness and like these very theoretical abstract concepts that really don't acknowledge the very real organ and systems that are going on in your body. And I think it's to our detriment because I think then we really, when we don't know that the damage we're doing, we, can do a lot of harm and abuse and neglect on those very systems that keep us healthy without knowing that we're doing it. Um, so I think that's the biggest in my message and in my mental fitness practice. That's the real takeaway I want people to know is you have a very real brain and nervous system that need to be well nourished, that need to be well rested, that need to be developed in healthful ways. They need to be supported and taken care of, and that you can't just do it through magical thinking.
Yes.
Yeah, that you need real healthful influences to make sure that your system again is as healthful as possible. As I like to say, too, it's the difference between walking down the middle of the street or walking on the sidewalk. Like which one is puts you at most risk of getting hit by a car, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, that's
It's
so
like,
true.
yeah, so of course the safest thing is to walk on the sidewalk. So you know better, you're doing the right thing. But again, that doesn't mean that a car isn't going to lose control and hit you. So again, you can do all of the healthful things and still end up with a health condition. You can still end up with, cancer or there's other sort of even mental health condition or physical health condition. Largely, again, because there's so many compounding factors that we're only just starting to learn about
Yeah.
from the from what we're breathing to what we're eating to just the electrical fields and radiation in the environment. Like there's just so much that we don't have control over and we don't really know enough about yet. So all we can really do is do our best and take as best care of ourselves as possible.
Yes, and focus on the things that we can control, get educated, and really learn more about people like you that are doing this important work, Scott. So, before we wrap up today, I want the audience to learn more about your book, My Brain Can't Poop, and where they can find it. And then also feel free to share your website and any other information that you'd like the listeners to know about 4D Fit Mental Fitness.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, this is usually a piece that I forget to do.
No, shout
This
it out.
the self-promotion piece.
Yeah.
Well, I will share a little health anecdote so my book is called My Brain Can't Poop: A Mental Fitness Guide for Humans, and it's available through Amazon in print and ebook format. So it's free if you have Kindle Unlimited in ebook format, and it's also produced as an audiobook on most podcast platforms. So I release it as a podcast add more content and information. So wherever you listen to your podcast, look for My Brain Can't Poop and it'll be on there.
Why did you call it that? That's so
Yeah,
interesting.
that is a question that sometimes comes up. So obviously there's a humor component to it. So this is can be a very high level, highbrow, again, $10 word sort of conversation when you're talking about the nervous system and neuroscience. So I really wanted to add some levity and humor to it and really make it accessible, but also to really call out the fact that the brain is an organ. And that organ, just like your gut, has a function. And one of those functions is mental function. Just like for your gut, it's digestion. But with our brain, what's happening is we are consuming a lot of stimulation, a lot of, different nutrients, different sorts of electro influences without the ability to kind of shed the waste, right? Like our gut has. So with our gut, if we eat something toxic, what would we typically do? Our body's going to try to eliminate it in one way or another. It may not be pleasant, but we're trying to get rid of that toxicity. With
Mhm.
our brain, we don't have that capability. So we all we have really is our stress response. Our stress response is what's telling us this is not good. This needs to be avoided or this needs to be kind of gotten rid of in some way. But it's also a lot of times stress can be a driver for people. So we can become addicted to stress, which our culture tends to be. So it's really that awareness that your mind is coming from an organ in your nervous system that needs to be taken care of. And you need to be able to process kind of the waste. Like what is not healthful, what is it that you're consuming or that you're processing, neurologically, neurochemically, physiologically, that your brain can't just get rid of on its own, that you actually have to, which is a big reason why we need sleep, right? Is to shed some of these toxic chemicals that build up, why we need, maybe talk therapy or different sorts of therapeutic processes to help our brain and nervous system regulate and kind of repair and shed some of whatever this toxic activity has been going on inside of us. So that's part of it. It's also that part of that realization that it's probably the only organ that we deal with where in our healthcare field, we separate the function from the organ. So our brain health field is separate in our healthcare industry from the mental health field. And we don't do that with any other organ. Like with digestion and gut function, we do gut health and it's all connected. You see a specialist that is, a gut health specialist and they're going to know about your gut. You're not going to have to go to somebody else who knows about your stomach or your intestines. Like that person is going to know about the organ and the function. And for many different reasons, which I go through in my book too, I just kind of ask why do we do that? Like why do we separate mental function from the organ? And so that's part of it too, is just to raise awareness about how in our healthcare system we are still striving to connect the function to the organ and to understand that. And part of my learning process, so I published My Brain Can't Poop during the lockdown, so during the pandemic. I just, I'd been working on it for years, but during that time, I was basically unemployed, was just, scraping by. And I realized like I need to make use of this time. I want to contribute to the world. I want to get this book done. So I really worked hard to publish it at the end of 2021 and had basically no budget. So I didn't have any money to hire an editor. I looked at publishers to work with, but I just didn't have a large enough following for them to, take me on as a client and kind of the different parameters that you need to actually get a large publisher to publish for you. So I self-published and I had a couple of friends. Thank you. Yeah. And
Congrats.
thank you. And so it was a lot of stress put on myself. That was also a motivator. So welcome to
Yeah,
America.
there you go.
And, again, without really realizing it, because for me, it was again that goal of thinking, okay, I'm going to get this done. It's going to be a platform. It's going to help people have the conversation, maybe raise awareness about the importance of brain health and neurodiversity in mental health and function. So I published, my husband had been one editor. I had a couple of other friends read my manuscript just to go through for typos, make sure it made sense, any sort of missing parts and pieces, and submitted my manuscript on a Friday. online and felt this huge sense of elation. It was just my nervous system was tingling from head to toe. It was just the dopamine was just flying high, and I felt so good about my accomplishment. I got it done. It was this huge stress that I was just relieved to have it done. And then my anxiety and ADHD kind of kicked in,
Yeah.
and I just thought I'm gonna give it one more look because I just want to make sure it's perfect. Like I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything
Mhm.
because I know as a communicator too, you can do a lot of writing and your eyes just see what you want to see, and you kind of have to
Yes,
give yourself a break to go back and see it with fresh eyes, right? To
that's
kind of see
right.
those missing pieces. And that Saturday morning, then I opened up the manuscript just to look at it again, and I started seeing like this sentence had been chopped off and this period was missing. So things that like spell check wouldn't necessarily catch, and
Yes.
that eyeballs that are looking for things maybe don't necessarily catch. But seeing it with fresh eyes, I started to see little errors, and immediately my stress and panic and anxiety just
Mhm.
went through the roof. So I went from elation to panic in a matter of a couple of hours. And I asked my husband, can you drop everything? This was on a Saturday. I said, can you drop everything you're doing today and just take half of it, look through it, find any errors? I'll take the other half. And he said he was busy and he, with work and just didn't have time.
Mhm.
And immediately my hands started to itch
Oh,
and
yeah.
I started to get swelling under my eyes and I started to get puffiness on my face and I had hives up my arms, and by Sunday I was in such a state that wasn't going away, that I was just having swelling all over my body,
Oh,
that I went into urgent care, and my husband's like, we need to go. I was starting to get a sore throat and we went into urgent care and they admitted me right away, and they said, you're on the verge of anaphylactic shock because after that sore throat is your throat closes up.
wow.
And, so they wondered, like, did you eat something? What was it? I'm like, it's the same food. I mean, we were on lockdown, so we weren't going out to eat. We weren't doing anything. Like, it
Right.
was, the routine that was happening day after day after day after day. Like, there weren't really any differences happening other than this hugely stressful moment of publishing my book. And I told them, I'm like, well, I published a book.
Yeah.
And they were like, "What? Like, how?"
How?
And
What
I'm
does that
like,
have to
"Well,
do
it
with
was."
anything?
I'm like, "It was." I experienced like this huge stress, and I told them the story, and they're like, "Well, we can't figure it out." But they're like, by no surprise, about 80%. I think, and my memory might be wrong, but I think they said about 80% of these unknown sort of allergic reactions, they just don't know what triggered them. They put me on prednisone, which is a corticosteroid. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and gave me an epi shot, epinephrine, those EpiPens for, anaphylactic shock, which is adrenaline. And adrenaline is a stress hormone too. So my brain
Mhm.
was going, you're giving me stress hormones for this anaphylactic shock that I know was induced by stress. Like it made so much sense to me. But you can't do a scratch test for stress, right? Because
That's right.
your neurochemistry is changed by the time I was in this state, like that stressful moment was 2 days ago.
Mhm.
So you can't like replicate that. Like it's not just like, oh, cat hair, oh, we're gonna expose you to cat hair and we know you're allergic to cat hair. So that was, I mean, it took me to get out of that state. Like I was very scared for my health probably for about 2 weeks because I would have these weird inflammation
Oh,
moments where I'd get like a hard lump on my chin and then on the back of my head, and it was really bizarre. And after that experience too, I know there was kind of an uptick in different autoimmune conditions kind of post COVID.
yes.
So there's also the question of what may have been related to the COVID virus, and how maybe my immune system was already compromised and then the stress just like wiped it out.
Mhm.
So, whatever kind of those factors were that compounded to it is still kind of a mystery for me. But I jokingly say like my next book will be called How My Book on Mental Fitness Nearly Killed Me,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
it was,
Yeah.
again, like I, without even really like knowing enough about, again, mental health and the impact of stress and my anxiety and how it's related to depression and different mental
Mhm.
health conditions and just focus and kind of the mental function. But going that again, making that connection to how your nervous system is directly connected to your immune system. Like that was the part where I was like, this is no joke. And
That's right.
thankfully that didn't manifest as cancer, but it was very similar in the level of inflammation
Yes. And lumps,
and lumps
yeah,
and swelling, and just it just made my immune system go bonkers.
yeah.
And so it was really kind of an eye opener for me too, just even more so, beyond mental function, how stress and just again our neurochemistry just affects every aspect of our health and well-being.
Mm,
And so again, it's not a fact of mind over matter. Like I was determined to get this book written and I
right.
did, but I wasn't minding what mattered, that I needed to be gentle with myself and I needed
Yes.
to not set that expectation of
Yeah.
perfection. I needed to just roll with it and say, "Oh well, the book's not going to be perfect. If somebody has a problem with it, so be it." Like
Yeah.
I wasn't that's not where my nervous system was functioning. I was very much panicked and stressed. And there are so many factors in life that do that to us and how
That's the
that's
truth.
affecting our health and well-being. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell the audience your website, Scott.
Yes. So if you
Mhm.
want more information with my book, podcasts, I also have a mental fitness playlist because music is a very big part of my mental fitness practice that I talk about more in different capacities too, but it's at 4dfit.net. So that's the number 4, the letter D, FIT.net. So 4dfit.net. And my nonprofit partner program is Mental Fitness for All with the number 4.org. So mental fitness for with the number 4 all.org.
Wonderful. I will share
Yeah.
that information in the listen notes so that the listeners can easily contact you, learn more about your book, and all the wonderful work that you're doing. Before we wrap up, Scott, there is someone out there who has just received a cancer diagnosis. They've just shared with their family the news. What tips or what encouragement do you have for them from a mental perspective, a mental fitness
Mhm.
perspective that you
Mhm.
would be willing to share?
Mhm. Well, I think the most important thing just to, especially in that state, is just to embrace that you are a unique neurological, physiological organism, human being. And whatever has contributed to your health condition may be different from somebody else. So just really embracing and realizing that your journey through health and life is not going to mirror somebody else's, and that to learn as much about yourself and to accept as much about yourself as possible from a healthcare perspective, just be really leaning into the education piece of it that isn't based on maybe what they've learned about somebody else.
Mm,
And I think with both of my siblings, and as I've gone through that as well, that again, the statistics can be very scary because they imply that everyone is the same. And I think just really embracing that we're not all the same and that our bodies will react and respond to different health conditions, even cancer cells, in different ways, to not lose hope of what your system can do given the right circumstances and given the right support and given the right conditions to heal and repair that might be different from somebody else. So, whatever stage you might be at, if there are trials, even the term trial sounds scary. It means like, oh,
yes,
we don't know if this
we don't
works.
know.
Right. But to like really realize, I mean, there's a reason why in the healthcare field, there is basically nothing that they come out saying, this is 100% effective. Like, I challenge anybody to find anything that anyone ever says this is 100% effective because of the fact that every person is different.
Right.
And if there is an opportunity, however you react and respond to different treatments, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's no hope for you. It means that that treatment wasn't the right one for you. and that there might be another. So I would highly encourage, if you are at that stage in your treatment where there are trials available, where something, isn't working for you, to not necessarily lose hope, but that, there's just still more learning and education to be involved in knowing how is your system functioning and how is your system operating, and to really embrace the science of it and not so much the statistics,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the statistics can feel very limiting. But just to say, stay curious and hopeful, and know that there are many people who are in similar situations, and everybody's journey is different. So embrace your journey, embrace yourself, and just take each day as it comes.
Wonderful advice and tips, Scott. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
What I heard you say was be creative. That ties back to what you shared when we first started and how you found your path and started your journey. So be creative, don't give up hope. And as Scott said, just keep trying different things. Scott, it was such a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you so much for all of the education that you've shared with us about mental fitness, mental health. I so appreciate you. And keep doing what you're doing. It's very important.
Thank you, Talaya. Likewise, just thank you for being there for people in this time of need, and providing education and support and all of those healthful healing, you know, support functions that you provide that are just so critical to our health and healing as well.
Thank you, Scott. It's my pleasure. Before we end today, I'd like to give a shout out to the listeners. Also, think about if there's something that you learned today, how can you apply it to your life? Ponder on that question throughout the day after you've listened to this episode, and even find me on LinkedIn, leave a comment. Thank you so much for joining us. Please share, follow, or subscribe so that you can easily find this podcast and listen again. You can listen to Navigating Cancer Together on Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. If you're looking to expand your professional network, please join me on LinkedIn. I'm an active member on the platform, and I personally invite you to connect with me there. Let's grow our connections together. Search for Talaya Dendy, BCPA. That's spelled TALAYADENDY, and then BCPA. That is it for this Wednesday. And until next time, let's keep navigating cancer together. Take care. Thanks for listening to this episode of Navigating Cancer Together. I hope you found it helpful. Please be sure to subscribe, share, and tell your friends and family about it. For notes from the show and previous episodes, visit ontheotherside.life and check out the podcast section. I would love it if you join me for the next episode. Talk to you soon.